Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSPs. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 11th of June 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment, pause the video. Right, let's go to, before we go to the front line and look at each individual place, let's look at a couple of subjects brought up by the Institute for the Study of War, the American military think tank, in their daily report from yesterday. We're going to look at Belgorod Oblast. So Ukrainian strikes against Russian military and logistics assets in connection to the United States partial removal of Russian sanctuary in Belgorod Oblast may have compelled Russian forces to change their deployment and transport patterns. The Crimea-based Ukrainian partisan movement reported yesterday that Russian forces recently redeployed air defense systems from Crimea to Belgorod, and I've talked about that twice now. Really important that you are getting that move from Crimea to Belgorod. So that is to say that they are really bare on air defenses there, and they are having to bring them up to Belgorod because one assumes Belgorod is getting absolutely hammered by HIMARS at the moment. And there are multiple images coming out even right now. So today, this is happening. First, a drone hit what locals say was a sugar factory in a village of Oktyabrskoye. So that is happening there. And then we have, meanwhile, elsewhere in Belgorod, in the town of Stary Oskol, there is another fire, reportedly a parking lot for trucks and lorries. There are talks about strikes taking place here, so I'm not sure whether these are just random fires or strikes, but I know that it has been fairly hot in Belgorod. To continue with the Institute for the Study of War, so the Russian forces recently redeployed air defense systems from occupied Crimea to Belgorod, and that Russian air defenses are not completely covering Crimea as a result. So it's a real issue in Crimea, and they will only, the Ukrainians will only strike more and more frequently there. And then that leads to discussion of whether they are going to strike the Kerch bridge. So footage dated on the 8th shows that Russians begun transporting fuel across the Kerch Strait. I showed that to you or referenced it, across a railway bridge. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesman stated that on the 29th of April, Russian authorities had not transported fuel across the Kerch Strait railway bridge since March 2024 due to the threat of Ukrainian strike against the bridge as a fuel transport crossed, which could ignite and possibly destroy the bridge. Now, that has not happened. The Ukrainians haven't done that, but it's possibly more likely to happen now that Russian air defenses have been compromised. There was talk that you couldn't take the weight on the bridge. I don't know how true that is, but there has certainly been less transport, less cargo going across that bridge than we have previously seen. And then it talks about the bridge and transport and change logistics there. Goes on to say in the Sea of Azov, that is, if you remember this sea, goodness me, the browser's not working very well today. So the Sea of Azov, if we come out, that's your Sea of Azov. And there was a report by the Ukrainian military, as the ISW discusses, a report by the Ukrainian military that a landing ship was hit yesterday in the Sea of Azov. Then Platenchuk from the Ukrainian military came out and said, no, it wasn't. That didn't happen. But there have been various claims of other boats and ships being hit. A tugboat, a barge, landing ship, another unknown ship. A vessel disappearing off trackers, and then oil slicks appearing. So something has happened, just not quite sure exactly what. All multiple things have happened, and we just don't know. Anyway, that's a bit of explanation of that from the ISW. And then we kind of go on to the frontline update. I'm actually not going to dip back into the ISW. I don't think it adds too much to what I'm going to be saying anyway. Yeah, we have no change to that northern area. So Kharkiv is quiet in terms of change of mapping. If you recall from yesterday, if you watched yesterday, Suryat maps the pro-Russian mapper that would normally be where these gaps are with a red indication of Russian-controlled territory, is not mapping at the moment, hasn't mapped in about a week. And so I have taken their map off here. I can just add it back on as soon as they pick up their mapping, if that is going to happen, or they're done for now. But this has happened before. They might be on holiday. There were rumors of that. Anyway, no changes there. there was this activity that was taking place just across the border in Sumy, with the Russians being taken out in activity in a village on the Ukrainian side of the border there yesterday, but no news from Sumy particularly. Then we come and look at the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. No change along that axis, which is really good news for the Ukrainians. There has been activity as far north as near Sinkivka, a lot around Ivanivka, and then further down south on all these sort of hot points down until we get to the Seversk front line. Actually, in the Serebryansky forest, Ukraine has, or the Russians have been pushed back or do not control as much as was previously thought. And that could be from a Ukrainian counterattack. It's more likely geolocated evidence to show that the Russians were actually further back than thought. It's quite difficult, well, not as difficult as it was because these trees are predominantly bare, but it is quite difficult to geolocate within forest areas. And so earlier on in the conflict, Andrew Perpetua was very reluctant to change his lines around the Serebryansky forest unless he had super good evidence to do so. Okay, no change to the Seversk front line and northern Bakhmut until we get down to Chaziv Yar. And as you can see, some changes in Ivanivska with both mappers here, Deep State Map and Andrew Perpetua, showing that the Russians now have complete control over Ivanivska. Now, this is interesting because this small town or village has been fiercely fought over. I think it's largely flattened. You've got higher ground up here. It's very difficult to remain in Ivanivska easily without getting pummeled. It's very similar to Klishchivka down here, which sits below the higher ground, again, to its northwest. So both sides, I think, tentatively go in and then get hammered. But it's interesting that as Kiev Independent reports, Ukraine controls Ivanivska near Chaziv Yar. Battles are ongoing in Staromyorsk, as say the military. So Kiev controls the situation in Ivanivska near Chaziv Yar. Statement comes after the Russian Defense Ministry claimed on June 10th that its forces had captured Staromyorsk. So that's where the Ukrainians claim they're still fighting and that they control Ivanivska, both of which go against the Russian narrative. The crowdsourced monitoring channel Deep State then claimed the same day that Russian forces also captured Ivanivska, a village on the eastern outskirts of the embattled Chaziv Yar, and advanced as well further down south. We'll look at that later. Quote, regarding Ivanivska, I can say this: the settlement belongs to Ukraine. The Ukrainian defense forces control this sector, Voloshin told the Kyiv Independent, adding that Russia continues to launch strikes and ground assaults in the area. As of this morning, 350 strikes were recorded in the Chaziv Yar area, including 254 during the past day. The majority of the attacks, 222 of them, targeted Ivanivska, which, if that is true, then if the Russians are targeting Ivanivska, it means that the Ukrainians are still there. Over the past week, 1,233 strikes were recorded in the village, Voloshin said. So this definitely goes against what most others are saying, and indeed the change in what the mappers are saying. So Andrew Perpetua and Deep State both saying that the Ukrainians do not control Ivanivska. So somebody's wrong. My guess is that, this was grey zone. Ukrainians might be active on the outskirts and maybe, charging in once in a while. It could be that they control a few buildings somewhere in Ivanivska, and they say, therefore, that the Russians do not control Ivanivska. I'm not sure, but there's definitely something wrong if there's such a difference of opinion. Then when we come down to Klishchivka, Deep State Maps has taken a bit of control off the Russians in terms of inside Klishchivka. I'm not sure what that pin means. I'll have to ask JR, because that could indicate Russian gain rather than Ukrainian gain, unless sometimes the lines reset themselves after you change them. So I'll check with JR. But it could well be that there's a couple of spots of Ukrainian gains, or it could be just rejigging for the mappers there. Okay, so activity in Chaziv Yar, that's one of, I guess, the main areas of activity at the moment, Avdiivka being the other, given that, look, there are no changes to the rest of the eastern front line, which I find quite surprising. So when we come down to the Avdiivka area, this whole sector, the Russians have I don't think, advanced nearly as quickly as one was, I guess, fearing at the time, where they moved through Avdiivka really quickly and got to this Derna River. Derna River, I think, did a really good job of slowing the Russians down, hopefully enough that the Ukrainians were able to build defences in suitable places, given that they hadn't previously done that, and that caused quite a lot of consternation from Ukrainians themselves and pro-Ukrainian voices. We have Andrew Perpetua, and I read this to you this morning, but it's pertinent to Avdiivka, so I'll read it again. I'm genuinely surprised, he says, by how little ground Russia has managed to take west of Avdiivka. I expected them to move much further, especially north of Ocheritina and west of Pobieda. In my opinion, it shows a weakness of the Russian military that they were able to exploit capturing Avdiivka. And as an aside, it's becoming increasingly amusing to me personally how the pro-Russian analysts out there are starting to have these little mini meltdowns regarding Russia's inability to exploit any small victories they achieve. This is a really super important point. Not only is it true that the Russians are having sort of lots of meltdowns or lots of concerns that they're voicing very publicly on the socials, but it's this sort of cyclical nature that Andrew points out at the end here that is so spot on. So we've seen time and time again that Russia has the numerical superiority to capture key Ukrainian defensive positions, but not the strength to continue moving once the position is taken. Okay, let's go and have a look at ideas like this. So when they took Avdiivka, you'd expect them to then continue with that momentum to take Lastochkerna, Tonyenka, Orlivka, Semenivka. These are tiny little villages, right? And you think, we've taken Avdiivka, let's go on to the next place and take it. But they got stuck at these tiny villages here and grind through these fields at literally like a field every 3 days or something like that. It is incredibly slow going. They got to Ocheritina and they've been grinding through the fields on successive days. Like a day like today, no gains at all. So marginal gains. They've taken Arkhangelska here, but they haven't taken Novo-Alexandrivka, right? And each of these settlements that they take, when they do eventually take them, each of them comes at a huge loss. So Mariinka is another great example. They ground through Mariinka over how long was it? Goodness me. And then what they've done since then, they've just about got through Mariinka's outer areas until they reach Herivka, and they can't quite get through that at the moment. Let's go further to the south. Novomokilivka cost them 320 vehicles at least, and goodness knows how many troops. They are now just about grinding through Paraskovivka, and they've got Konstantinivka to contend with. So they can't capitalise on, right, we've taken that, let's keep going at some increased rate of momentum. No, they grind it out here, and then you go on to the next place and grind it out, and all of these. So not just Novomokilivka, but you say that about Krasnohorivka, where they're trying to grind through that settlement. You talk about Mariinka, you talk about Pervomaisky, and onto through Netalove and onto Karlivka. Each of these taking weeks to take at any one time in each place, and then you come down to Vuhledar, which they didn't even get to grind to take Vuhledar. You talk about Staromyorsk that they're just taking back now, and Uruzhaine that they're trying to take. It's slow and it's grinding, and that leaves Andrew to say this. So we've seen time and time again that Russia has that numerical superiority to capture key Ukrainian defensive positions, but not the strength to continue moving once a position is taken. So Russia keeps entering this cycle where they have these huge grinding battles, where they suffer huge attrition, but never the breakthrough on the other side to justify the losses. They just go from one huge attritional battle to the next huge attritional battle in sequence, which is how they end up losing thousands of vehicles. So the footage that Andrew watches on a daily basis, and huge amounts thereof, are enough to make him sort of pull his hair out, or maybe not, maybe be happy with the fact that Russia are just making a real pig's ear of these offensives, to the point where, and you can say the same for Kharkiv, where they grind themselves into a town, and if they succeed in taking that town, it comes at a massive cost. And in the case of Vovchansk, they don't even succeed in taking the town, and they are taking massive losses. Russia are having their staging points being absolutely hammered by the Ukrainian guided multiple launch rockets. They are getting Vovchansk hit by an increasing number of Ukrainian released aviation munitions, which is good news going forward. And it's just, everything about the Russian way of doing things is insanely attritional, and it is not particularly improved. There's never been any moment where you've gone, that was brilliant. The Russians did absolutely fantastically. They're really good tactics they were using. There are occasional moments here and there. It's not that, Russia are all useless, and they are learning, and they do make it difficult for the Ukrainians. I think it's broadly the same for the Ukrainians in terms of, I don't think they're going to be able to take any large amount of land without huge attrition to their forces, but they're not on the attack at the moment. The Russians are just sunk cost fallacy, throwing the huge amounts of resources at the same old problems in the same old ways. Right, around Solovyovo, south of Ocheritina, we have the Ukrainians being pushed back little by little towards Novoselivka, Persia here, and Sokol up there. So both mappers indicating that the Russians have made some gains there. But again, we're talking, half a field and these are big fields, admittedly, and there are fortifications, and each tree line is, the enemy has dug in. So it's not easy, but it's not easy. And the Russians are losing huge amounts of troops, but because they don't have, the Russians have an air advantage, but it's in no way an air superiority. They aren't really doing close air support with their aircraft. We have seen that occasionally in places. It did happen in Avdiivka for a while, but then the Ukrainians bring their air defense units further to the front, and Russians lose planes. They lost a plane yesterday. They lost the plane this morning, although albeit by accident, but they did have one shot down in the Prokrovsk direction. So it's high risk, really high risk aerial activity around here, and it's incredible what how many losses the Russians are taking. Right, when we come to Krasnohorivka, which is down south from Avdiivka on the way to Mariinka, so you've got Mariinka there, Krasnohorivka, where the Russians are fighting inside the town. We saw yesterday that, according to Andrew Perpetua, they've made some small gains in a kind of L shape there. No change today to the maps, but one source, Dead District, says the airview slightly pushed back the Russians in Krasnohorivka. A school and a plot of the private sector were liberated. Control of about 0.8 square kilometers was gained. So this is over in this area there, by all accounts. Interesting claims still going on down here that the Russians don't have control necessarily over some tree lines here, where possibly the Ukrainians did a deep counterattack a couple of weeks ago. Haven't really heard anything of that area since. So anyway, Krasnohorivka, there you go. Moving down past Novomikhailivka, no change there, no change to the Slodka area. As we dogleg round past Vuhledar and Pavlivka, we come to Staromyrsky and Uruzhainy. This is on the Velika Novosilka salient, so we have this town Velika Novosilka. You got the Mokryali River that meanders its way down through Uruzhainy and splits Uruzhainy and Staromyrsky here. So on one side, the Ukrainians are still holding the Russians back in Uruzhainy, one side of the river, and then the other side of the river, the Russians appear to have had really good success in taking most of Staromyrsky, as according to both of those mappers. Some people disagree. We have the Ukrainian General Staff indeed in that boat. So they say that the Ukrainian forces continue to repel Russian troops in Staromyrsky. Whether that is... it seems really odd that on days... we've got a day where both mappers, or not both mappers here, but up in Ivanivska, both mappers said, right, Ivanivska is under our control. And here, Deep State Map says, right, Staromyrsky looks almost entirely under Russian control, changing the mapping today. And both times, the Ukrainians say, yeah, no, we still control both those places, or we're repelling the Russians in that area. So there could be an element of PR here coming from the Ukrainians. There is obviously fierce fighting taking place in Staromyrsky. Defmon here says, looks like the Russians have recaptured Staromyrsky, and he's basing that on a bit of drone footage that has one of the buildings in it with at least one Russian flag, although I can't really say it looks anything like a building anymore. So there you go, a few flags sat on what's left of that building. I don't know really what that tells you. It tells me that a Russian was there to put a flag on that building, but I don't know that it says that they've recaptured the settlement, but they might well have done. And no report says Russia made further advances inside Staromyorsk, raising their flag in the northern part. It is assumed that the AFU lost control over the village. Russian forces advanced into Uruzhany, occupying streets in the southern part close to the center. So it could well be that Russians control all of Staromyorsk, and that the Ukrainians are just doing a bit of PR in denying that took place, and that they are in the center of Uruzhany trying to press forward there as well. Okay, that is all from the southern front line. Indeed, from the rest of the front lines, there's no change to the Dnipro River Delta. I'm not really sure that the Ukrainians are still on the left bank of the Dnipro at Krinky. There's no change to the Krinky mapping there at the moment, but there's no news and no evidence that I've seen of the Ukrainians actually on that side. It could be that they're just able to hem the Russians in from being able to retake what's now complete rubble, and as the Russians haven't really gone into the settlement and taken it, and they're getting hit by drones and artillery possibly still, then that's why the control has not been changed for that area. Anyway, there you go. That's the frontline update for the 11th of June. Thank you very much for watching. Please take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.